Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. After the collapse of negotiations between Austria's centrist parties to create a government without the far-right Freedom Party, President Alexander von der Bellen tasked the leader of FPÖ, Herbert Kickl, with the task of forming his coalition government. Now, what does it mean for Austria, and what does it mean for Europe? To talk about it, we're joined by Professor Melanie Sully, a political scientist residing in Austria. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
So, what happened in Austria over these past few days that, despite efforts of the mainstream politicians, there is a high possibility of a far-right government in Vienna?
Yeah, that's right. We had elections on September the 29th in the autumn. Here we are in the middle of winter and still wondering who's in the government, and there have been coalition negotiations. And basically, the three parties that were originally given the task of forming a government by the president, one of them, the Liberals, just got up and said, you know, we're not interested anymore. So that left two of them, namely the two, which have been the two pillar parties of the Austrian Republic since the Second World War, the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, talking to each other, and then the Conservatives got up and left, you know, and so there was just nobody talking anymore. And there was the one party left over, the far right party, that had been left out of all these negotiations since September. There was really not much else for it but to call upon them to see, well, what can you do? And in the meantime, over the weekend, the Conservative Party that said, no way do we want a coalition with the far-right party, changed their mind, changed their leader, and that changed the federal chancellor at the moment. And so the president said, well, you know, I can't really do much else. I don't like this situation, but we'll see what you can do. And so we assume that this week there will be talks beginning now between these two parties, the far-right Freedom Party, as it's called, and the centre-right party, the People's Party, as it's called, Conservative Christian Democratic Party.
Right, but if the Conservative Party fails to form a government with the far right, what happens next? Because I guess the programs of two parties are very, very different.
Well, there is a lot of overlap on some points. And the Freedom Party, even before the election, moved a little bit to cozy up to the Conservative Party with an economic program which was rather similar, involving cutbacks in social welfare and so on. And on immigration, migration, and asylum seekers, we call it the centre party, the centre-right party. So there is some overlap on some issues. But one particular issue, for example, the membership of the European Union, attitude towards Russia, and these kind of things, yeah, they're not so close together. So they're going to have to make compromises. Both sides are going to have to make compromises. Your question, what happens next? Basically, we would be in a bit of a mess because we're running out of partners for coalitions. And I suppose there would be new elections. And if that produced the same kind of result, there would be new coalition negotiations, and we have the summer and almost a year of complete stagnation.
Right, but the snap elections would definitely lead to promoting the far right party, right? So you would have the same situation over and over again until the far right gets it all, right? Right. So
I suppose so. I mean, that is the kind of. Sorry, but I mean, you can never tell in an election campaign what comes out at the end, because early elections could not be held until the end of April, beginning of May. Who knows what happens until then? And if the Conservative Party change their leader again to be a more charismatic leader, some people have been talking about the former Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, Who knows what happens? Once you call an election, you can't be sure it's all going to play out the same way.
Now, is this the end of Chancellor Nehammer's political career?
He has resigned as chancellor, leader of his party. What he will do next, we don't know. He may get into private economy or not in politics. That's open.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about Nehammer, he has been also criticized for his trip to Moscow after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, what should we expect from his successor in this matter? You already said that the FPÖ party is way more pro-Russian than conservatives. So should we expect a major U-turn in this matter in Austria?
Well, I think, when you say Nehammer went to Moscow, I think it was a very different sort of attitude from the Freedom Party. I mean, they have gone along with the sanctions. They've gone along with the criticism of the war against Ukraine. And the Freedom Party has been much more Moscow friendly, even way before the invasion of Ukraine. So there is a very different tone in these two parties. But of course, the Freedom Party will be in a coalition. So although they'll be the dominant party, they've still got to keep that People's Party or the Conservative Party on board. But if the war in Russia-Ukraine gradually phases out in some way over the coming months and year, then maybe this won't be such a big topic. But obviously, at this current time, the whole question of defense and foreign policy is very central, and it could be a bone of contention between these two parties. For example, there's also the question of the Sky Shield EU satellite defense system, which the Conservatives want to have. And the Freedom Party says, it's far too expensive. We can't have that. We don't need it. We're a neutral country. So there will be lots of compromises having to be made. And I think we will have to see how that develops over the next days.
I'm also wondering about the gas deal with Russia. The Gazprom deal terminated last month. Now, could the new government be looking to revive it somehow?
Well, the Freedom Party, I think, would be very keen on that. And they've been openly very critical that a break was made with this and with relations to Russia generally, which they say have harmed the working class or the lower middle class, particularly hit them with high energy bills. And the inflation was a big issue at the election in September, and that was quite a big point. So they will be looking for that. But then again, the Conservatives aren't very happy with that. They want to go more on the Western European EU line. And a lot has been done actually in Austria to free itself from dependence on Russian gas. And some some companies have already achieved that. So I think we'll have to see, how big an issue this becomes in the now new negotiations.
Mm-hmm. Now, having said that FPÖ is highly Eurosceptic, would you say that the future of Austria within the EU is in question now?
I don't think the membership's in question, no. Once the Freedom Party did flirt with the idea of having a referendum like in Britain on leaving the EU, they realised this is not a runner in Austria. It's a small country, very dependent on other EU members, the economy, particularly Germany, and it wouldn't be, it wouldn't get a majority. That's very much a minority view. But they're Eurosceptic, and they're very critical of the sort of bureaucracy and the whole structures of the EU. So they want reform of the EU, whatever that means. But this was something really which bothered the federal president when today he entrusted the Freedom Party with building a government, and the Alexander van der Bellen, the president, went before the cameras and said, this is European Union, and how we perform as an EU constructive member is very important. And I want reassurances, or he hinted at this from the Freedom Party, that they will, they'll stay in this consensus that we have on EU. So we think he might write into any agreement on the coalition a sort of preamble. We've had this situation before, in which the Freedom Party would have to say, we will abide by certain points of European Union membership, to see human rights, minority rights, because they've all been criticized for violating these as well. And that they will actually commit themselves to upholding democratic governments and democratic rule of law.
Now, lastly, I'd like to ask you to take a look at the bigger picture. Now, we'll have elections in Germany in February. Now, do you see a possibility of the Austrian scenario repeating itself in Germany? I mean, the far-right party participating in ruling the country?
Well, even an even wider view, you can see the big friend of the Freedom Party in Hungary had been long established, in Slovakia, Italy. We have a kind of sea change towards right of centre politics. And you're right, in Germany, the Austrian situation has been very closely watched at this point. And there have been all kinds of noises from various quarters, either criticising it, because the big thing in Austria was to have a firewall against the Freedom Party actually entering into a dominant position in the central, being in the state governments, for sure, but not in this situation. And so in Germany, there is a lot of criticism that this firewall could also break in Germany. But the AfD, or the far right party, is quite a new party. It's more radical. Freedom Party was formed after the Second World War in the mid-1950s in Austria, has a long tradition. It's been in government before, but as a junior partner. So it's not quite the same situation. But then you've got in Europe quite a few who are leaning more towards Russia. And they seem to be growing in voice, and if they coordinated together, then that could be quite influential in the long term.
And problematic for the majority of Europeans. Professor Melanie Sully, political scientist residing in Austria, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you also.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more news and features here on TVP World.